Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Common Sense Guys channel. Some of you may know me better as Jason. How are you all doing today? Today we are going to be talking about Iran. We're going to be going through, as you can probably read from the title, all of the timeline since Donald Trump has taken charge of the US and how escalations have seemed to be, at least in most parts, seem to be on Iran's face. And it seems that Donald Trump has been responding to the escalations and has now reached boiling point. Now, again, I am going to be heavily sourcing all of this video, so please check out the sources that are linked down below. With that being said though, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into this video because, by God, it's going to be a long one. I'm sure that all of you have heard now that General Soleimanni has now been murdered, shot, killed, assassinated, all of the above, and how World War III is just literally around the corner apparently. Well, let me just take a couple of minutes, maybe a bit longer, to try and explain and go through the timeline of how this has actually happened, how this has occurred, and how maybe America are not actually the bad guys on this occasion at least. Now, we take our time at the beginning, which for us is going to be around about 2015, when the Irani nuclear deal was set up between the US and the rest of the EU and NATO. This was to do with uranium, how it was mined, and how the actual enrichment process of how you turn it into a bomb. The Iran nuclear deal mostly was to talk about how that they were going to stop making nuclear bombs or not have any nuclear weapons. Now, the uranium ore could go into two different places. You could have a centrifuge that then turns it into actual proper uranium and then goes into being a nuclear bomb. Or you could have a second process, which is uranium ore then going into a reactor, and then because of the reactor, it irradiates the uranium, and in that reactor it transforms some of the uranium into plutonium, and then from the plutonium you then get weapons grade plutonium that goes into a nuclear weapon. So for a lot of people this was a very, very important deal, simply because what this actually was supposed to do was to make sure that the uranium that was being processed would not be turned into weapons grade uranium or turned into plutonium. Idea of using a reactor to irradiate it. Now, this enrichment process, which comes from either the centrifuges, goes up to around about 5% before it can be used into any sort of powering or nuclear power plants. It seemed that Iran was processing the ore to be around about 20%. Now, when you take that into consideration, that is about 15% higher than what it needs to for them to be able to use it for nuclear power plants and nuclear power, and is well on its way to becoming 90% for its enrichment to become a uranium bomb. That means a nuclear bomb with a nuclear payload. Now, the agreement in itself is for some of their power plants to obviously cut back, make sure that some of them have gone into science research. Others as well have also gone into the point of saying that you cannot mine any more than 300 kilograms of the uranium ore, or 660 pounds, and all of this was done for 15 years, as it is to be considered insufficient for a bomb rush, or to be able to make a stockpile of nuclear arms. Now, the deal in itself goes into a lot more and different avenues and goes into much more detail, but for quickness sake and for the sake of the length of the video, basically the whole deal is to be able to limit the idea of if or when Iran can have any nuclear weapon capabilities, and that's why the deal in itself was struck up. Then you have the moment in which Donald Trump became president. On January 20th, 2017, Donald Trump was sworn in to become president. And then on May the 8th, 2018, President Trump announces that the US will withdraw from the Iran deal. But Iran, Britain, France and Germany say they will maintain the pact. In other words, they will continue with the same principles of the whole deal, but the United States will not actually be part of that deal. But everything that was already set up in that deal, that was already brokered, is still going to be, or should be, followed accordingly. Moving on to April the 8th, 2019, Mr. Trump says he will designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards as a foreign terrorist organization. Now take a wild guess on who was actually in control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards for Iran at that time. Now, on May the 12th, 2019, 2 oil tankers from Saudi Arabia and 1 each from the United Arab Emirates and Norway are attacked in the Persian Gulf. Now, the United Nations, the 3 nations that own the oil tankers damaged last month in an alleged sabotage attack, which the US has blamed on Iran, have told the United Nations that their joint investigation strongly suggests a state actor was behind the explosions, but the probe stopped short at pointing the finger at Tehran, which, if anybody wants to know, is generally somebody that is very, very heavily involved with Iran and can lead to, doing some actorships on behalf of Iran, or should we say, proxy wars. This will be a common occurrence that seems to come forth with these types of attacks, especially from now on. We're going to be getting in very heavy, very quick, and there's going to be quite a bit of proxy wars and blame shifting and blame games that seem to be going on at the minute. So the investigations of the United Nations also revealed that the first photos, the damage to the tanker's hulls taken by divers, showing large holes caused by what US officials have described to CBS Newslink as limpet bombs, believed to have been struck onto the ships by attacking divers for the May 12th attack. Now that means that divers swam to the ships, stuck some bombs onto the side of the ships, escaped and blew them up. So these weren't just random attacks that could have happened or may have happened, or mines that have even been laid. The United Nations, with the investigating US officials, have determined that they were limpet bombs, bombs that were stuck on the side of these ships. So the story still carries on and says, while investigations are still ongoing, these facts are strong indications that the 4 attacks were part of a sophisticated and coordinated operation carried out by an actor with significant operational capacity, most likely a state actor, the UN was told on Thursday. Again, going forth to the point of saying that Tehran acted on behalf of Iran. So, moving on to 20th of June 2019. The US confirms drone shot down by Iran. So, a US military surveillance drone has been shot down by Iranian forces while flying over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran do not dispute that they shot the drone down. They do not say that they didn't do it. They categorically state that they did do it. They say because the drone strayed into Iranian airspace. Now, the US say that they didn't go into Iranian airspace, as they could actually take all the information that they wanted to do, as the drone itself can fly at an extremely high altitude and gather the intelligence if it wanted to at any point. They also state that it was around about 23 miles away from the Iranian coastline, which is classified as international waters. So Iran at this moment, from the 20th of June 2019, have either by proxy using Tehran to destroy 4 oil tankers by blowing them up in some aspect, also as well singularly by destroying a UAV drone in international waters. Now, each individual action doesn't seem like an escalation or doesn't seem like it's in the form of an aggression. If so, it seems like it's minor. Now, if you start adding up the 4 ships that got bombed, if you add up the drone that has been shot out of the sky, it starts to look like there may be a campaign of aggression, or at least an escalation of aggression that seems to be stemmed from one side. So, do you remember me telling you about the US pulling out of the nuclear deal with Iran? But yet, the other countries, such as the UK, the EU, and a couple of others, actually still were having a deal and an agreement with Iran about the nuclear capabilities that they actually were supposed to have and stick to. Well, since the 1st of July, Iran has broken that twice. Now, the first time, as I said, was on the 1st of July 2019, when they let them know that they were going to be breaking the deal because they were upping the uranium enrichment program. And on the 2nd was on the 6th of July 2019, because they let them know that they are going to be upping it again up to 5%, which was 1.2% higher than what they were originally supposed to do. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually higher on the level of enrichment than what it is for the rest of Europe at 3.8%. This to me shows you the fact that they don't want to be beholden to any types of deals that are actually there, regardless of if the US was actually a part of the deal or not. They have broken the treaty or broken the deal with the EU, with the United Nations. So nobody can say that they broke the deal beforehand because they were going to spite the US. No, they actually spite the allies that have stuck with them and beside them throughout this time. So now we move on to our own oil tanker situation. So on July 4th, the British Marines seized an Iranian oil tanker called Grace 1 in Gibraltar. The UK territory received written assurances from Iran that the ship would not discharge its cargo in Syria. So the reasons why Grace 1 was actually held by the UK was confirmed by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which said that Iran must abide by the assurances it had given that the tanker would not proceed to Syria, which is under EU sanctions, which Iran, through the proxy of using Tehran, was shipping oil to Syria at the time of when Assad and Hezbollah and all that type of stuff, and Hamas, were in Syria fighting, as you know, the terrorists that they were fighting in Syria. And to make sure that Syria was under sanctions and to make sure there wasn't oil or money going into the actual country, which is the reason why it was being held. So, a couple of weeks later, on July 20th, 2019, Iran seizes the British-owned oil tanker Stena Imperial near the Strait of Hormuz. What they've actually done is that they seized the ship for literally no other reason than the British had already had the Turanian ship in its docks because they perceived them to actually be taking the oil to Syria, which was under EU and United Nations sanctions, as well as US sanctions. So they actually boarded a ship, held people hostage to try and negotiate to get their ships released, which they ended up doing. Now, you might be able to argue that maybe they shouldn't have taken the Iranian ship in the first place, but they should have done. It was under EU protection, under United Nations protection. What Iran, under the ideas of Tehran, and in this case actual Iran, took over an English flagged ship to hold it ransom to bargain for their own oil and their own ship. If that's not an escalation, if that's not a form of terrorism or an international incident that was directly caused by Iran, then I do not know what is. On the 22nd of July 2019, still in the same month of the 3 incidences that have happened in July, this making it the fourth, Iran arrests 17 of its citizens and charges them all with spying for the US. Now, some are reportedly executed. Now, these are Iranian citizens that have apparently been contacted by different US embassies from different countries that apparently have been put into the nuclear systems to be able to spy on nuclear systems, understand the science that they're going through, and watch what they're doing and so on and so forth with the nuclear side of things. And yet 17 of them were caught. So many of them were killed. Nobody can confirm or deny if they were and how many of them were, if so. And yet this country is now being defended that even if the US put CIA operatives in their country, that they weren't going to be tried for it, weren't going to be internationally recognised or shamed or whatever, or imprisoned. No. What they were going to do is hide them away so nobody even knows who they are, and some of them were executed. Again, if this is not an escalation for bearing down the barrel towards an idea of war, I do not know what else can trigger you to think that. Before that we do move on to the next point, I really do think that you, the viewer, should listen to how the Iranians were talking about when the ships were being caught, and how they knew and were knowingly breaking international law, and was, by their own knowledge of Iran, and by Iran's foreign minister at the time's own admission, their own acts of terrorism, by forcing another country's ship that was in international waters into their own waters to board the ship and change the flags over to say that they now own that ship. Take a listen.
This video, released by Iran's Revolutionary Guard, apparently shows in real time the British flagged Stena Impero oil tanker forced into Iranian territorial waters. Radio recordings also captured the moment a British warship warned the Iranians not to interfere with the vessel.
If you obey, you will be safe. Alter your course to 360 degrees immediately. Over.
7 Navy patrol boat, this is British warship Foxtrot 236. Please confirm that you are not intending to violate international law by unlawfully attempting to board the MV Stena.
But minutes later, Iranian commandos took control of the vessel, apprehending the international crew and replacing the Union Jack with the flag of Iran. This morning, Prime Minister Theresa May is considering retaliation, including freezing Iranian assets. The seizure of the Stena Impero comes just 2 weeks after the UK's Royal Marines helped seize an Iranian tanker off the coast of Gibraltar. It's believed the vessel was carrying oil to Syria in breach of EU sanctions. Iran's foreign minister had this to say about the seizure and economic sanctions from the West.
This is economic terrorism, pure and simple. We need to repeat it again and again.
Now, just in case that you didn't hear that bit at the end, as I know it was cut off very quickly, but that's how the video was, he says, this is akin to economic sanctions, and we should do this again and again. In other words, he is saying openly as a foreign minister that he wants to do this again and again, to take over other ships in international waters and force them into his waters, Iranian waters, to take them over, to breach international law, a form of piracy and an act of terrorism, and could be argued an act of war. And now we move on to the timeline that everybody seems to actually know. So, from December the 27th, 2019, an American civilian contractor is killed and several troops injured in a rocket attack in the Iraqi city of Kirkuk. And the attack was carried out by Hezbollah and is an Iranian-backed militia group. So the rocket attacks were actually coming from an Iranian-backed militia group which was attacking American civilian contractors and killed that contractor, injuring several other troops as well while they were defending those people and that area. We now move on to December 29th, 2019. America missile attacks Hezbollah targets in Syria and Iraq. Now, whether you agree with the attacks or not, remember, you are still in a war with Syria. There is still conflict going on. There is still targets that are going on. There is still the sanctions of these attacks going through as they are officially still at war. Also remember with Iraq that the Iraqi government has allowed America up until this point to be able to use their military might in defense against Hezbollah and Hamas and other terrorist organizations. So even though people may disagree with the proportion of the attack, they are legally able to do this and legally able to have that recompense as they were targeting the people that attacked them. Now, we move on to December the 31st. The protesters that attack the US Embassy in Baghdad. So, in a symbolic blow to the US prestige, by storming the American Embassy in Baghdad, trapping diplomats inside while chanting "Death to America" and slogans in support of pro-Iranian militias. Now, let's take this for an instance. Just use our little brains and get them jogging a little bit. Why would Iraqi people that are attacking the embassy on behalf of Iraq, or because they think that they're attacking it on Iraq's benefit, be shouting pro-Iranian militia names and supporting them and slogans of them? Why would they be shouting "Death to America" when we have literally just heard the Iranian parliament shouting out "Death to America"? So hundreds of demonstrators besieged the US compound, at one point breaching the main gate and smashing their way into several reception rooms. They lit fires, battered down doors, and lobbed bricks of bulletproof glass. Now remember, while they're doing this, they are all shouting Iranian militias' names, slogans, supporting all of the Iranians. Now this, by definition, is proxy. A proxy invasion and proxy war. Now remember, as soon as they breached the compound, they are on US soil. They technically attacked US ground. They actually went onto US soil and physically attacked the US embassy. If that is not a declaration of war, I do not know what is. If another country, even by proxy, invaded your soil and caused massive amount of damage, I do not know what else to be able to call this than an invasion. If they have just broken into and breached US soil, that is classified as an invasion. However minuscule you think that it is, by definition, it is an invasion and a declaration of war by proxy. So now, moving on to what everybody knows and what everybody has an opinion about. The death of Soleimanni, which happened in response to this as the US said that they had evidence to prove that he was orchestrating all of these different attacks and that he was the head of what was going on and was causing all of these proxy attacks. A US contractor to be killed, wounded many, actually breaching US embassy, invading US soil, even by proxy, and yet people wondered why the escalation was to take out a person who they had evidences of saying that he was orchestrating all of this. And people want to sit there and say, oh, why did he kill Soleimanni? For those particular reasons. He was basically orchestrating the invasion of US soil. So the escalation is proportionate, in my opinion at least. Now we're coming to the point of the video where I need to say what I don't like that Donald Trump has done. I don't like the fact that Donald Trump has come out, whether he has done it accidentally, whether he meant other ways or whatnot. It seems to me that he has come out and said that he is going to target 52 people in retaliation to something that happened in the 1970s, which, okay, significance, but also means that you're coming from a moral and a emotional standpoint rather than it being a proportional response. Also, as well, within those 52 apparent targets that they're going to have, they're going to be targeting cultural and civilian aspects of Iran. That's a war crime. Pure and simply a war crime. Now, if Donald Trump wants to get himself convicted of a war crime and be like every other president that he has completely and utterly condemned in the past, then that's fine. But that also just proves that he is a massive hypocrite in that sense as well as actually going against and having no respect for international law, in which he himself in 2017 signed up to that international law and guarantee. So that in itself I have a massive problem with. But that is mostly what I have a problem with. I don't really have too much. Maybe in these different wordings of different tweets and so on and so forth, I could have my own personal gripes. But how he's handled the situation diplomatically, I can't really complain. He's held off for a long time, especially with going over the different aspects of what we considered our escalations. If we go through the escalations again, just one more time. So you have the 2 times that Iran has broken the nuclear deal. You have the 5 oil tankers that have either been sunk or have been captured. 5 to 6 tankers in total that have been captured by Iran, and the one that was captured by the UK. So that's 6 acts of war that you could actually say were committed either by proxy or not by Iran. That's 6 acts on personal property and so on and so forth. You could also say that the Iran that shot down the US drone, themselves admittedly that they've done it, could also be classified as an act of war, though by itself admittedly a very iffy way to either retaliate or say go to war. But adding it all together, it is making a very strong case that the escalation isn't coming from the US's side. It seems to be coming from the Iranian side. So Iran also arrests 17 members of its citizens and says that they are CIA operatives for whatever reason, propaganda reasons or whatever. I have no idea the reasons why they actually have done that, no idea whatsoever. Some of them could have been executed, none of them could have been executed, but nobody knows what's happened to these 17 alleged CIA spies. It's just gone under the radar, so to speak. Nobody really seems to want to talk about it. You then move on to the most recent stuff. So at this minute in time, we're up to 8 acts individually that could be classified as an act of war. But yet, at that point, still no war, still no acts of aggression. December 27th, the American civilian contractor that was killed by rocket attacks carried out by Hezbollah still wasn't enough to go to war over, which is fine, absolutely not a problem. But that's up to 9 instances separately that they could have gone to war over, and now that's 9 that's mounting up. You also have the troops that were injured in those rocket attacks as well, which is a direct attack on Americans as well, which should in itself have a response, but did in the aspect of December 29th when the American missiles attacked the Hezbollah targets in Syria and Iraq. But then they decide that they are going to attack the US Embassy. And by attack the US Embassy, I don't just mean that they threw rocks at it. I mean, they breached it. They stormed it. They have now gone into the actual aspect of invading US soil to attack US hearts and citizens. If they could have got hold of diplomats, they would have held them hostage. They could have hurt them. They could have killed them, depending on what they wanted to do. The correct response, in my opinion again, was to take out the person who was orchestrating these heinous attacks that could have potentially caused so much more problems and so much more hassle, so much more death than what the media is reporting. But yet, somehow, all of these responses, all of these instances, all of these 11 instances that we can just add up very quickly are not apparently enough for people to go to war over. And even if any of them did, people would say that you're a war hawk over it. Now, again, I'm not going to stand here and beat my drum all the way from the United Kingdom saying USA, USA, USA. But please try to understand it, that the actual escalations have been coming from Iran, not from the US. So when you're sitting there and saying that, oh, let's defend Iran, no, Iran's been the aggressor. Even by proxy, Iran has been the aggressor. Since 2003, Iran is responsible for more than 600 American troops in Iraq. Now, think about that for a second. Iran is responsible for 600 deaths of troops in Iraq. How does that work if you're not supporting the terrorists, even by proxy? Soleimanni himself has been shown with pictures, taken pictures of and with the heads of Hezbollah and other terrorist organisations. Speaking of Hezbollah, Hezbollah themselves have vowed retaliation against the US for the Soleimanni killings, and also were attending Soleimanni's funeral. So let's think about this for a little tiny bit, get that noggin a jogging, shall we? Why would somebody that had no ties to any terrorist organisations, that never used them as proxies, that never used them to fight any unofficial war against the US, why would they be pictured with Soleimanni as well as attending the man's funeral if they didn't already have respect or a working relationship with Soleimanni? Why would any of this actually happen? Why would these people turn up if they weren't already friends, allies, partnerships? All the claims that I have just made can be backed up in the description box down below under the subheading of claims. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, before I get too irate, I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you very much for taking the time to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you very much. These are my opinions on the matter, but more importantly, this is a direct timeline of how Iran, even by proxy, has been targeting the US for at least 2 years by proxy. In fact, the escalations by and large and by far have been by Tehran under the guidance and stewardship of Iran. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Take care, and I will speak to you all again very soon. Bye bye for now.